Morning, everyone, or hello, depending on where you are. I'm just going to wait a second, as I sometimes do, for people to join us, and then we'll get cracking. So welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. For those of you who are joining for the first time or watching this subsequently for the first time, a little bit about the series. My name's Lorna Steele. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service. We have 4 archive centres around the Highlands and a really wide range of collections, and my job involves connecting people to the collections that we look after. So this live cast, as all of the ones in the series, is brought to you by High Life Highland. There's no cost to the viewer for watching these and taking part in them. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and this event requires no payment and no subscription. So just tune in either here on Facebook or on YouTube and watch this for no charge. It's nice to see already Tanya and Brian saying hello, saying where you're watching from. Please carry on doing that. It's really, really nice for me to see as I'm chatting away that the comments come up on my screen, and it's nice to see where people are and where they're watching from and different places that we're reaching and connecting to. So who have we got? Yeah, Australia, all sorts of places. As I said, we've got 4 offices in the Highland Archive Service. And any of you who've been watching this series so far will know that some subjects are universal, the likes of school records or property records. Sometimes are found across all of the offices. But a lot of the collections that we hold are specific to different areas. And so some of the subjects I'm going to talk about in this series are very specific to one office and one collection. We have a lot of family and estate papers in our collections. We have the likes of the Munro of Navarre collection, the Munro of Fowles, the Fraser Titler. We've got all sorts of different family and estate papers, Waternish, and all sorts of different ones across our offices. And this week I'm going to focus on the Cameron of Lochiel papers, which are held in our Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William. What I'm going to do going forward is still do some kind of overarching subjects, but I'm going to try and pick some that are specific to different areas so that you get to know a little bit more about the collections held in each office. So this week, Cameron of Lochiel from our Lochaber collections, already scheduled. We're going to look at the Wick Harbour Trust records from Nucleus, and we're going to look at the Duncan Macpherson collection, which is held in our Skye and Lochael Archive Centre. So obviously I'm going to continue to do ones from the Inverness office as well, but just so you know, trying to raise awareness about the collections that are held across all the different offices. So yeah, this week, Cameron of Lochiel. I'm going to preface this by saying this is absolutely only going to be an overview. This is a huge collection. It's an amazing collection as well. It is so extensive. It covers 39 linear metres, and it covers 1600s to about 2006. So a very wide-ranging collection in date, in subject, and in area. So if you know the collection and you're going, why hasn't she mentioned that? It's just such a wonderful, huge collection of all sorts of different subjects. So this is really just to give you an overview of what's in it. So the collection is documents relating to the Camerons of Lochiel. And I see we've got some Camerons watching, so nice to see you. The Camerons of Lochiel are the main branch of Clan Cameron and the family from which the clan chief is drawn. The clan homelands are in Lochaber, and the chief seat is at Achnacarry Castle, and that was built in 1802, and I'll come back to that in a wee second. Clan Cameron are famous for various things, but perhaps most famous, or most renowned for their loyalty to the Jacobite cause. Throughout the 1700s, staunch loyalty to the Jacobite cause, which was, quite a risky standpoint to take. So I'll touch on that in a second and give you a bit more information about that. Like most family and estate collections, It's split loosely into two halves. So the collection comprises estate papers and personal and family papers. Obviously, the two halves are absolutely intricately linked because the family are absolutely intrinsic to the running of the estate. But there is a distinction. But the link between those two sections can be witnessed as an example by the very early documents in the collection, which show the estate coming back into family ownership after it was forfeited following the Jacobite rising. So the actions of the family had a direct impact on the running of the estate. The estates were forfeited after the Battle of Culloden, and then were returned to the family in 1784 on payment of a large fine. So I'll come back to that shortly. Estate papers in all our collections are very, very wide-ranging, and this one is no exception. The estate papers show management of the land, so split into some management of the land and estates itself, management of the people and the tenants on the land, the impact on the estate of big events such as the coming of the railways, developments such as the Caledonian Canal, things like that. There's often a lot of information about local businesses in there, and there is in this one, and some insights into the impact of local and national events on the land and on the local population. So, for instance, there's a lot of legal documents in an estate collection, and in Cameron of Lochiel there are saisines, so that's land transfer documents. That's the legal process of the land transferring from one person to another from the 1700s onwards. Wodsets, which is a good word, that's early mortgage contracts, again from the 1700s onwards. There's tax and contracts for people taking over different properties. And some of the papers within that legal section are particularly interesting. So I'm going to read this to you, and there's a couple of things I'm going to read out to you just because there's no way I'll do it justice if I don't read the exact wording. So this is from an item in the legal section of the Lochiel collection. Letters of remission under the Great Seal. So this means this is somebody effectively being pardoned from, and that's under the Great Seal means it was had royal assent. So letters of remission under the Great Seal in favour of Alan Cameron of Lochiel for arson at the time of the troubles between the Marquess of Huntly and the Earl of Murray, or at the time when the said Alan was employed in the King's service against the Clan Gregor, and for the slaughter of certain persons committed by the said Alan or his accomplices about September 1614, and for the capture of the late Hector MacLean of Lochboy about December 1608, and for his other crimes of arson, murder, caption, torture of any person whomsoever, theft, receipt of theft, etc., excepting only his treason against the king's person, the ravishing of women, and the debasing of the coinage. So that's quite an extraordinary list of things, isn't it? He's a particularly interesting clan chief, so if you're interested in finding out more about the time that he was in control of the clan, the History of the Clan Cameron book is available online. There's a lot of information there about his particularly turbulent time as clan chief. But as I've said so many times throughout this series of talks, it's just such a privilege to me to know that I can handle that document, I can look at it and have the real connection with the time it was written. The document dates from 1624, so it's nearly 400 years old, and I just find it so amazing to be able to put my hand on that and look at it. And when we're back open, those of you who are not in Australia will be able to come in and have a look at that if you want to. And I just think that's wonderful. I mentioned that the collection involves some records around the running and the management of the estate. So these are really interesting just from a general land management point of view, but great for family historians and local historians as well. And we get a lot of people who come in to our offices to look at these sorts of family and estate collections to find out a bit more about that. There are plans and maps of the estate in the collection. There are letters, books and accounts from the factor, so about the running of the estate, letters to contractors, to people coming to stay on the estate, all sorts of things. There are a lot of correspondence files in this collection. There are, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of letters from the factor around about the running of the estate. And if you bear in mind, so far I'm only talking about the estate part, not the personal part. I'll come on to that. There are financial records, so ledgers, rent collections, factors accounts, stock lists, things like that. So giving a real insight into what it takes and what it costs to run an estate in the 1700s, 1800s and 1900s. As I said, there are also a lot of records connected to people on the estate. So I mentioned rent rolls. There are also employment records. And for any of you who are interested in tracing your family in Scotland, you'll know sometimes it's really hard to find an estate collection that records all of the members of staff who lived and worked there. And so I'm certainly not going to promise that everyone is going to be on these, but they are, they do exist, and they list stalkers and gillies and things like that. There are also lists of families who left the Lochiel estates, lists of crofters, lists of people who left the Lochiel property for Australia in the 1800s, notes of census returns. So the census would be taken every 10 years, and there's notes about those census returns within the collections. And from 1846, there is an account of the parish of Kilmally, the population, and the ability of that population to support themselves during the present scarcity. So there was a huge amount of poverty and hunger and crop failure in the 1840s, and so they've written an account of the parish of Kilmally and how they think the population are going to cope with this situation. There are leases for crofts and properties on the estate, and there are there's information about the War Memorial and all those who appear on the Roll of Honour. As I said, these records are great for family historians, and there's all sorts of useful information to be found in them. There are records that talk about places on the estate, so things that give information about improvements on houses and buildings, plans of Achnacarry Castle itself, which, as I said, was built in 1802. There's information about the building of Achnacarry Memorial Cross, which was a memorial put up to the 24th chief of Clan Cameron, Donald Cameron of Lochiel. That was designed and built by Alexander Ross, famous architect, and that is the reason he is a very prolific Highland architect, and he is one of the reasons that the building our Lochaber Archive Centre is named Alexander Ross House, is named after him. There's also records within the estate collection about the impact of the First and Second World War on the estate. For instance, the Achnacarry is very famously associated with the commandos. They used Achnacarry as their training grounds. The troops were taken there for training, and so there's a lot of reference to that within the collection as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's also a lot within an estate collection like this, references to local businesses and developments, and this collection is no exception to that. There's information about the Ballaghulish Slate Quarries, about various hotels, the Lochiel Arms, which was taken over as an auxiliary hospital for the Scottish branch of the British Red Cross in the First World War. Quite nice to see that, given they're marking their 150th anniversary this week, so that's quite nice just to highlight that. A lot of papers to do with the Caledonian Canal, because at that end of the canal it's impacting on Lochiel estates, and also the West Highland Railway being established. So like I say, it just makes you aware of the various things, the various ways that an estate collection shows the impact of all sorts of different things. So it shows the running of the estate itself and the people involved in that, but also it shows the impact on the estate of national events, local events, developments, because the landowners are the people who are involved in those conversations. If you're going to put a railway through or a canal through, you need to speak to the landowner to be able to work out where it's going, if you're buying land from them, if they're involved in that process. So always worth looking in estate collections for things like that. I'm going to stop there talking about the estate records, and I'm going to go on and talk about the personal papers within the collection. Before I do so, and I know I warned you last week, I'll do this a few times, just to remind you that the livecast is being brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and this event, as with all the Learn with Lorna, past and future, does not require any payment, and it is subscription free. So please do just watch it on our own Facebook page or on the YouTube channel. Moving on now, and I'm conscious of my time because, as I said at the beginning, this collection is just so extensive. I'm going to look at some of the personal papers that can be found in the Cameron of Lochiel collection. I mentioned at the beginning that the Camerons are particularly associated with the Jacobite cause and their support of the Jacobite cause. So famously, Ewan Cameron of Lochiel was a very famous and well-known Jacobite supporter. And then his grandson, who was Donald Cameron, who you'll maybe know as Gentle Lochiel. Although I read somewhere earlier that he was, yes, he's gentle, but only in the context of the time. So he was the first person to greet Bonnie Prince Charlie when he arrived in 1745 at Borrowdale, and he was wounded at the Battle of Culloden, and it was after that the estates were forfeited before they were returned in the 1780s. So the personal papers obviously give a lot more information about the family and the people connected to the family, the daily lives of those people, their friends, their friendships, and things like that, rather than the estate management. So this part of the collection includes memoirs and life stories about the chiefs from the 17th chief onwards. So he was born in 1629. So from then onwards, there's information and documentation about the chiefs. And obviously there's some retrospective gatherings of information in there as well. There's an extensive collection of Jacobite papers in there, and that's really wonderful. And for me, I use those records a lot with my colleague Ailey, who is based in Lochaber Archive Centre. We use them with school children, we use them with all sorts of different audiences to talk about the way in which that loyalty to the Jacobite cause. And if you're not familiar with the subject of the Jacobites, then we've done one of these sessions on that, so please do go back and have a look at that. That loyalty to that cause, the impact that could have, and it's really amazing that we've still got such an extensive collection of letters about their support, because as I said, that's a very dangerous position to take in the 1700s. You're going up against the establishment and against the crown. So amazing collection of letters. So for instance, there are quite a few letters in there from the Earl of Mar, who was one of the Jacobite military leaders, to Lochiel about raising troops, about getting clan members together, raising arms to stand in support of the rightful king, who was King James VIII. He got called, he was never King James VIII, but that's what his title would have been if the throne had come to him. Various other letters from other local landowners and clan chiefs about raising arms, about marching orders to support the Jacobite cause, news of the troops landing, they're the sort of the text messages of the day saying that's them landed, we need to do this, we need to support, we need to meet here. Really fascinating letters. It's an interesting thing to note that throughout that, Lochiel is spelt differently all the way through. Sometimes it's spelt as we know it now, Lochiel. Sometimes it's Lochzell or Yell. And that's just one example of something we come across all the time, which is that names, place names and people's names change all the time throughout the records. If you're one of the people who's got a Mackenzie or a MacDonald or whichever it is in your family, you'll find And if you haven't found it yet, you will at some point, that name will change right the way through. So there's no such thing as being a Mac or being a Muck in history. They change all the time. And so Lochiel is an interesting example of that right the way through the collection. There's lots of different spellings of that. Also in amongst the Jacobite papers, there are some letters that have cipher signatures. So that's because, as I mentioned, it was a dangerous thing to be supporting the Jacobite cause. And so people would sometimes write with a false signature or a fake name so that they could protect their identity a little bit. And also there are full ciphers in the collection, so entire lists of words and code words that people would use so that their letter couldn't be instantly interpreted. There are lots of letters from the 1700s from Italy, from France. As I've said on Jacobite Week, people often think this is a Scotland-England thing. It's nothing to do with that. There's people all over Europe supporting the Jacobite cause and people all over Europe against the Jacobite cause. And so it's interesting to me when you look in that collection, there are letters from the 1700s, from Italy, from France, from other places, writing about the Jacobite cause, and also letters in there from James, who was who we call the Old Pretender, so who would have gone on to become king, thanking Lochiel for their loyalty and support. There are letters from other famous names, as I say, the Earl of Mar, also General George Wade of Wade Roads. Letters describing battles. So there's a letter describing the Battle of Preston and what had happened there. So really fascinating contemporary insights into huge events. Really interesting collections. Going forward, there are letters from and to subsequent clan chiefs. So from the 19th onwards, really, they become more extensive. One whole subsection is known as the Lovat Papers. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with Simon Fraser, Lord Lovat, the 13th Lord Lovat, also known as the Old Fox. He is just the most extraordinary character, and that he was extraordinary before he was in Outlander. He is just such a character. He is famous for basically protecting his own interests, always veering from one side to the other, depending on who, what he thought might happen and what he might be able to get out of it. But it's very much believed that his heart was with the Jacobite cause. And so there's a lot of letters in this collection between him and Lochiel up until his execution in 1747. It's a great insight into his personality. And I want to read you one example. And again, as I've said previously, I couldn't word this better myself. This is just phenomenal. This is a letter written in 1740 by Lord Lovat. And he's writing to Lochiel, the clan chief, about the departure of his wife. Now, any of you who are familiar with Lord Lovat will know he had a very tempestuous, romantic life. And this is his a letter to Lochiel, 1740, describing the departure of his wife. And honestly, it's like something out of EastEnders. He says, "God, I thank myself in heaven since I was rid of her, for I never had 24 hours peace while she was with me. It is impossible for you to imagine how fertile she was in malicious lies and stories, besides her constant thieving, which she could no more forbear than breathing. So whatever the unjust resentment of her friends may be, I think myself most happy to be quit of her, because it is hardly possible for me to suffer in any other shape as much as I have suffered by her ill nature." But yeah, I love that. God, I thank myself in heaven since I'm rid of her. It just sounds not like something that was written 300 years ago. Yes, that's a great extract. And as I say, a lot of letters by Lord Lovat, and they're all really give an insight into an interesting personality. We're moving on, and as I said, it's a very whistle-stop kind of overview of the 1700s, because there's such a lot of fascinating information about the 1700s in this collection, but a whistle-stop tour. So moving into the 1800s, a lot of papers and letters of subsequent clan chiefs, And then you start to see more now letters and correspondence and information, diaries and so on from their wives and children. It starts to become a wider collection in terms of different people. There are marriage contracts, as I say, there are diaries, all sorts of things talking about how the family grew and expanded. In the early 1800s, by the time that Donald Cameron, not that that narrows it down, there are quite a few Donald Camerons, by the time of the 23rd chief, he married a lady called Vere Hobart. And one thing that I was very, very excited to find in the collection just recently, it's funny that we know our collections very well, but sometimes something happens that makes you understand a bit more about something in your collection. And for me, I was watching the BBC and HBO adaptation of Anne Lister's diaries, the TV series Gentleman Jack. And that was about the true story, almost verbatim from Anne Lister's diaries, who was famous for her female lovers in the 1800s. And during the course of the programme, they mentioned that she had had a very close friendship with Vere Hobart, a lady called Vere Hobart, who then went on to marry Donald Cameron of Lochiel, the 23rd chief. And if you've been watching this series for a while by now, you'll know I can be a bit excitable about these collections sometimes. And I was watching the TV series quite calmly with my feet up in my own house, and then they said, and she went on to marry Donald Cameron of Lochiel. And I immediately was, I need to go and look at the collection. And so when I was next in Lochaber, I had a look through the collection and found a couple of letters in the collection from Anne Lister to Vere Hobart. They had been within a bundle of correspondence to Vere Hobart and had just been listed as correspondence from friends, because at the time, the fact that they were addressed from Shibden Hall and were initialed AL, when the time they were catalogued, that just hadn't meant anything to anybody. And it's, although we know what's in our collections, sometimes things happen that give us a further insight into them, and that was really exciting for us when we discovered those. After Vere married Donald Cameron, she and Anne Lister carried on being friends and being in contact. So that was really exciting to find those letters, and they appear in this collection as well. As we come into the 1900s, there are extensive collections of letters from the First World War and from the Second World War. There were representatives of the family serving in both conflicts. If you were watching in World War I week, you'll maybe remember I talked a little bit about Alan Cameron, who served in the First World War, and his brother Donald. So Donald Cameron survived, and Alan Cameron died. So just one example of how any family was impacted by these conflicts, and the fact that one brother died, one brother survived, and that's such an example of what was happening in countries, all in families right across the country and right across the world. That terrible sense of loss, and I always wonder how it feels to be the one that survives. There are also letters from the Second World War from Donald Hamish Cameron, who served with the Lovat Scouts in the Second World War, and that is the current Lochiel's father. As I mentioned, Achnacarry was used as the training ground for the commandos in the Second World War, and the Lochiel estates and the family still have a very close connection to the commandos, and that relationship was cemented through that time. And I'm sure if any of you have been down in the Lochaber area, you will have seen at Spian Bridge the Commando Memorial. If you haven't, then do have a look at it. It's in the most stunning location and overlooks the training grounds where the commandos trained for the Second World War. I mentioned very briefly there that the current Lochiel, the 27th chief, so he is currently the Lord Lieutenant of Inverness-shire, which means he's the Queen's personal representative for Inverness-shire, which was a role also fulfilled earlier by his father. As I've said, it's very, very much an overview of an enormous collection, and a collection which is so full of all sorts of interesting information. If you want to know more about the collection and what's in it, then please do email us. The email address for the Lochaber Archive Centre can be found on our website. For more information about the Camerons and other aspects of what I've talked about, I would recommend contacting Clan Cameron Museum as well. They are based in Achnacarry, and also the West Highland Museum in Fort William. They have an extensive collection of commando material, so there may be things in there that are of interest to you as well. I'm going to finish off by saying again that the live cast is brought to you by High Life Highland. There's no charge to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and this event requires no payment and no subscription. So all you need to do is log on to our Facebook page or log on to our YouTube channel, either live or retrospectively, and there will be no charge and no need to be entering any payment details. If you are in a position to be able to donate towards the work of the service, then we would really appreciate that. As I've said before, this is such a hard time for all sorts of businesses. And it is a hard time for heritage organisations as well. So if you're in a position to be able to donate, and I absolutely realise not everybody will be, but if you are, then there's a link to that on this video, and we would really appreciate that. Next week, if you're able to join me, we're going to be looking at paupers and poor relief. And as I've said during the Asylum Records Week, this is another subject which is very emotional for people. It's a difficult thing for people to come to terms with the fact that their ancestors or people who lived locally were so desperate that they had to claim for poor relief and had to be part of that workhouse, poorhouse system. So it's another subject that we deal with a lot in our search rooms, and we handle with an awful lot of compassion, because these are real people, real people's lives, and people at their most, at a low point. And so we'll have a look at some of the stories that can be found in the poor relief records and tell you a little bit about what we do with those and how we support people looking at them. So I hope you can join us next week. As I've said 100 times, if you want to look back at all the previous talks, and there are about another 18 or 19 previous talks, they can all be found on our Facebook page, and they can all be found on our YouTube channel at no cost at all. Thank you for all the people who are saying they're enjoying the series. That's really nice for us to know, and it's really, I don't know why I'm pointing, there's no one else here. It's really nice for us at Highland Archive Service to know, High Life Highland to know, but it's also just really nice for me to know that you're appreciating and enjoying the things. So thank you very much, and hopefully you can join us next Thursday for Paupers and Poor Relief. Thanks.